Fallen, read by Sebastian Brown and Eliza Chadwick. Chapter 5. Reveal. The spear soared through the sky, slowing drastically as it neared Telvia. Hovering just a leap above the ground, there was no time to land. Instead, the cargo ramp lowered. Fenno and his squad were there to lend a hand, the ship still drifting forward. Telvia helped his wife and child aboard before climbing in himself. Fenno spoke into the radio, and the ship took off. Telvia glanced around. The cargo bay was unrecognizable, packed with people, at least 100. Some wore masks, others didn't. Some were dressed properly, others looked like they had just rolled out of bed. Everyone carried some kind of luggage, whether a small satchel or something bulkier. They sat on the floor, all eyes on Telvia and his family, their faces filled with concern. "What is happening?" Telvia shouted over the roar of the engines. "TV!" Fenno greeted him with a solid slap on the shoulder. "Talk to Atima on the bridge," he replied, clearly wanting nothing to do with it. He handed Telvia his radio back. The tactician and the rest of the security detail looked restless and filthy. Some areas of their gear stained with blood, though it was unclear whose. Telvia pushed through the crowd with his family, making his way to the dining room. It was filled with familiar faces. Some he knew by name, others only from photographs. A few greeted him awkwardly, relieved to see him, but clearly uneasy given the circumstances. He realized these were the crew's family members.
"Go and see what's going on,"
Oren said, settling Orvan at a table next to an acquaintance who was also trying to make sense of the situation. Telvia nodded and headed for the bridge, still dressed like a farmer. Inside, he found all the department heads, as expected, and some crew members. They were tense, exhausted, and just as grimy as the squad below.
"Telvia!"
Atima exclaimed upon seeing him. There was relief in her voice, but no excitement from the conversation to come. "Hey, crew. All right. Someone bring me up to speed," Telvia said, masking his anger with forced levity. "You've all been having fun in my absence?" He sat beside the navigation map, eyeing the flight plan. All eyes turned to Atima, the proud bearer of the director's pin.
"Right. Well, Telvia, glad to see you."
She hesitated, scanning the room as if searching for the right place to start.
"We decided to go our own way and start anew, as you know, but we didn't want to abandon the church just as the collective was on the verge of getting a generator running. We had intel on the progress, held a meeting, and agreed to leave the church ahead of the arms race by striking first."
She took a deep breath, her hands trembling in their cradle. Saying out loud what they had done just hours ago drove home the implications of their actions. It stunned Telvia. He had never seen her struggle to form a sentence before. She raised her voice slightly.
"In the process, we took fuel and supplies from them. Now there's a bounty on our heads, of course. But we're heading somewhere far from the city, a place we chose for a fresh start with our families and our loved ones, including the spear. We're taking the ship with us."
She finished and looked out the window. Telvia was speechless. A storm of questions raged inside him, but disappointment overshadowed them all. He scanned the room, but none of the other department heads appeared to have opposed any of this. Fenno was absent. Bastian stared down, lips pressed together. Oramos busied himself with the flight controls. The rest of the crew members left the bridge while Atima spoke. "And here I thought only Fenno needed to be kept on a leash. Turns out I've been flying with savages all along!" Telvia yelled, slamming his hands onto the map table. A few pins scattered. He forced himself to apply what he had learned on the farm, to not dwell on what couldn't be undone. But this was proving impossible. "Brilliant! Just brilliant! Let's start a war with the city, pin it on the church and leave them to clean up the mess! Did any of you think this through past your own noses?" he continued. Bastian jumped in. "Telvia, if the collective had powered up, they would have sacked every camp around them. These gangs are just a massive threat. The collective are just people, Telvia snapped. Just like you and me. You think they're animals because they don't have a leader, yet you acted just like them in my absence. He paced the bridge, seething. Atema stepped forward.
There was very little else we could have done in the time we had. This was our last chance to help
To get away with murder, theft, and every crime you could before making a run for it? Telvia interrupted. He dragged his hands down his face, feeling like he was losing his mind. How was he the only voice of reason under the sun? He felt like he didn't know any of his crewmates anymore. We have company, Oramos interrupted. He made an abrupt maneuver, forcing everyone to grab onto something to keep their balance. 2 small crafts on our tail, interceptors, closing the cargo bay ramp. Telvia grabbed his radio. Everyone, hang on tight. We have interceptors after us. Stay away from the outer bulkheads. Emergency personnel, go to your stations. Fasten all cargo on board. He ran to a seat and strapped in. Bastian ran off to the ship's clinic. Atema shook off her paralysis and strapped into her seat. Gunfire rattled the hull, hammering through the fuselage and leaving a trail of holes. An explosion rocked the ship violently. The terrified screams of the 100 people packed into the cargo bay reached the bridge. Telvia's mind raced. Who the hell was attacking them? Given what they'd done recently, the entire city could be after them, even the church. Number 2 engine is down, Oramos shouted. We're too heavy. We're going down fast. Telvia caught movement outside the window. 2 blurred shapes, interceptors, diving past them and slowly turning for another strike. The ship lurched, tilting sharply to the right. Through the front window, the trees below rushed closer, the horizon rising. Telvia tried the open radio channel. Cease fire! We have civilians on board! I repeat, civilians are on board! Telvia offered one last desperate prayer to Apollonius. Another wave of rounds tore through the ship and a second explosion went off next to the bridge. The ship tore through canopies below as it fell. Telvia felt as the ship picked up speed incredibly fast. Light burst through the cabin, blindingly bright. They picked up speed, but nothing happened. The light outside shifted, from intense white, then sky red, then a pitch black deeper than any night. The ship's windows shattered as all the air pressure escaped violently, ripping the breath from his lungs. A merciless chill invaded the ship. Telvia felt weightless. He could only feel the hum inside his own body and his heart racing. His ears pulsed with agony, his limbs yanked in every direction. He couldn't think or act, only surrender to fate. Slowly, he could hear sounds again, far away. A few heartbeats later and he could breathe again. The temperature climbed. Now he could hear the ship's alarms blaring. The pitch black outside slowly turned sky blue. A breeze rushed in through the windows. Then, wind roared. They were free falling. The screaming from below started again. Telvia tried to shout, but the wind and alarms swallowed his voice. Instead, his cry turned into a maniacal laugh. He had no idea how they were still alive. The crash felt absurdly endless. The ship trembled violently. Metal groaned as pieces tore away. Gravity pulled harder and harder, pressing him into his seat as they slowed down. Then, a sudden stop. The ship hit the ground gently, as if set down by unseen hands. It tipped to one side, triggering another wave of screams. Through the window, Telvia saw land. A clear blue sky stretched above. They were alive. Chapter 6. Home. It had been 2 days since they crashed. Or landed. Crash-landed. There was a lot to be excited about. The air seemed clean, the kind of clean you could only get before the war. The breeze was invigorating. The flora was a vivid green and the soil fertile. The animals, though a bit odd-looking, appeared healthy as well. They had found clean water in lakes and rivers. On the other hand, there had been no signs of civilization, no radio contact, and the ship was wrecked beyond repair. There were about 100 mouths to feed and finite supplies on board. Worry lingered beneath all the hope. Telvia later learned that apparently some passengers had died during the chaos. Yet, there they were, speaking about the event with excitement. People had been shot, crushed by cargo. Some had even flown off the ship or suffered fatal wounds. Everyone had a different angle of what had happened. Some swore they saw Fenno decapitated when the cargo ramp closed. His clothes were torn in that area, and those who had been shot had holes in their garments, but here they stood, safe and sound. Telvia felt like he had been born again. He called the event the rapture from the scriptures and claimed that their prayers had been heard. He had officially stepped down as director, taking this second chance to focus more on his family and himself. People still came to him for advice, and he was happy to help. His fury had settled, and all was forgiven. He only mourned those left behind and wished some of them could have made it to this strange new land. The crew had begun to make camp outside the spear. They figured this might be a long-term crisis. It was best to prepare for it and start looking for hunting spots, better shelter, and a primary water source. On the second day, they gathered for lunch, as usual. They handed out half rations to each person, trying to make the most of what little they had left. While gathered, they discussed what came next. Attima and the others spoke in front of the crowd, asking for anyone with knowledge or experience in such situations. It was clear new leaders were needed for this new challenge. A man raised his hand and stood when chosen. "Greetings. I believe I have the answers to many of your questions, though I am afraid I cannot reveal everything just yet," the old man said in a gravelly, aged voice, his accent slight and somewhat unrefined. He walked to the front and stood beside Attima. He was a full head shorter than her, and his face was slightly deformed, with rounder features than usual. He wore blue and purple robes. Somehow, no one saw him intermingle. Telvia felt uneasy about this man. He had never seen him before. "My father, Tyrus, is the one who ensured your safe passage to this land. He reached across the vast cosmos to your forsaken planet and brought you here, sparing you from the fate you sealed for yourselves." The man stood tall and proud. What would usually have caused laughter now sounded plausible, after what everyone had seen in the past few days. There was absolute silence across the gathering. "Apollinos!" someone shouted. Most of the crowd stood at this realization. Someone kneeled in reverence. Others prayed out loud, hands raised to the sky. Telvia stood in shock, his heart racing. A priest yelled from the back, "Are you from the scriptures, son of God? Sentenced to death by a chalice of poison? You have to be. Our Savior once again, you have to be," he said, desperate for answers. The crowd roared in celebration and praise. Their faith stared back at them for the first time. The old man did not seem to appreciate the comparison. He raised his hand. Now, settle down, all of you." He looked disappointed at the lack of civility. The crowd quieted instantly, swiftly tamed by an unknown force. He continued, "I know nothing of this Apollinos you speak of. There is no divinity by that name. However, you are right to offer me your reverence," he added, as though stating an undeniable truth. "I am the paragon Ixen, manifested here in human form for your convenience. Humans, I should note, are one of the many sentient races you will encounter in this world. Please pay special attention to my words, as they are vital to your immediate future." Telvia's attention was drawn to the man, and he couldn't take his eyes off him. His thoughts vanished, and Ixen had his undivided attention. The rest of the crowd seemed to be in the same trance. Tears dried on their faces, and their expressions froze in time. Eekson shouted at the whole crowd with an unnatural strength. "You were taken from your world not as punishment, but as an act of mercy, an act of grace from my Father. Your kind, the people of Belica, defiled his creation. You waged wars of unfathomable devastation, brought ruin upon your own civilization, and in your final arrogance, tampered with the very fabric of life itself, corrupting it until there was nothing left but the malformed remnants of my father's children and their inevitable extinction." He paused for a moment. Telvia and the others remained petrified mysteriously. It felt as if Judgment Day had come. Every accusation seemed to strike directly at his soul, as if some greater power was scrutinizing his every past action, judging his worth. His people's sins weighed heavy on his shoulders. He knew this moment was his reckoning. The man's commanding presence and absolute control over his will were inescapable. Eekson continued. "You now take refuge upon the world of Anoria, as your own world lies in ruin. You are guests here, the last remnants of the elves. This is your second and final opportunity, a rare mercy granted despite your past transgressions." Eekson's pupils emitted a faint blue glow as he spoke. His speech thundered in the hearts of the elves. His voice boomed inside their heads in an unnatural way. Telvia heard crying and laments from the crowd, who was still in a trance-like state. Eekson continued his relentless revelation, louder. "My father held the elves of Belica in the highest regard, for they rose to greatness without the guidance of gods or the aid of paragons like myself. You, despite your beliefs, walked your path alone, all alone. Your achievements were wrought by your own determination, toil and sacrifice. It was this unwavering resilience that made you his most favored creation." The brief summary of their existence brought everything into perspective for everyone. Eekson continued, pacing thoughtfully. "The races of Anoria have lived their lives intertwined with the will of gods and paragons. Now, for the first time, you too shall share in this gift, this being your first interaction with the divine." Telvia saw Eekson pause and scan the crowd slowly. He took in the stares of the last of the elven kind, each with a different expression. He made sure everyone had the time to process this moment and understand its importance. He spoke once more. "Belica is behind you. From here on, you alone bear my father's blessing as true elves. You will build anew, shaping this land not only for yourselves, but for those who will follow. More like you will come from Belica, and you must prepare the land to sustain them. Fulfill this first task, and I shall return." Eekson gave them back the reins of their destiny. "You may feel like nothing more than the embers of Belica now, but I say you take that fire inside you and forge a civilization worthy of all that you were and all that you've been through." Eekson raised his hands and gazed up at the sky. Telvia felt a sharp, burning sensation in his chest that quickly spread through his body, intensifying. It then focused on his forehead and burned painfully before fading away. Eekson then pressed his hands together and lowered his head. A crystalline sphere formed around him, and in the blink of an eye, it collapsed with a loud crack of lightning, leaving nothing but sparks in its wake. Atima's clothes whipped violently around her still form as the air rushed to fill the sudden void. Moments later, everyone was freed from the spell. Telvia gasped for air. His eyes immediately sought out his wife and child, who were beside him. They stared back at him, both marked with what appeared to be thin, delicate iridescent tattoos of geometric lines and half circles on their foreheads. Everyone had them. A wave of cries, laughter and hysteria erupted, breaking the silence just a heartbeat later. He hugged his family amidst the chaos and cursed his existence. He had only just begun to find his footing, and already the ground was gone again. He looked around and saw his people. He wondered if this truly was the last of his kind. The distress and panic amongst them struck a need in him to come to their aid, yet there was nothing he could do. He brought his hands to his head and faced the sky as the weight of the world pressed down on him. The chaos, the cries, the confusion, his shattered beliefs. It was all too much. Yet beneath the turmoil, the familiar fire of purpose began to burn within him again. He'd looked to the heavens and stars for meaning, never realizing the fire had always been his. He inhaled deeply and steeled himself to help his people start over once more.